So that's the benefit of this. You are getting off of the subaqueous system. The problem with this approach is always going to be solids. And it would have to be flushed, and to what extent, we're not really sure. And then you also have to deal with the fact that if this lake ran east to west, it would be much easier to accomplish this, but it doesn't. You have northern and southern. So trying to get gravity around this lake would be very, very problematic.
Now, is that because of the elevation? Why do you say that?
So, let's see, we have a big, oh, here we go. So if you look at this, can you imagine trying to gravity flow from here, right? When you get here, you have to go all the way around. Or put in a pump station and pump from here to the pole. And so this, going up to Rumbling Bald, this makes a gravity system, a strictly gravity system, very, very difficult. We've done zero grade systems, principally on wastewater plant effluent lines, where you have very little solids, and you can rely on the hydraulic head to push it through. So this is, like I say, in the brainstorming stage, nothing should be off the table. So this is one that's on the table. It's not one that we want to pursue or would recommend pursuing because of the solids. But it leads us into the next approach, which is what we're calling the gravity lift station approach. And so I want to, I may need to draw this, and I think Brian has actually designed a similar system. So the problem with gravity sewer is that you run out of elevation. And the question is what to do when you run out of elevation. So if you can imagine, you have a manhole here, and you come out into another manhole, and you come out to another manhole, and you come out here. You can kind of see what our problem is here. Now the benefit of this approach is that we can gain elevation so that we can gravity flow around the lake. The problem is, how do you get water to go from here to here? And the answer is a lift station, where you put a single pump in there whose sole purpose is to pump from here to there. So you're talking about a small pump. The other benefit, what happens when this pump fails? Water builds up and then flows by gravity. So you have a backup mechanism to prevent an SSO. This is not a long-term solution, but you do have storage, you do have a means to prevent an SSO. You do give David and his crew time. Yes. You do give David and his crew time to come out. You also reduce cost because you have one pump and not two. The pump is smaller, so it doesn't require the size of generators. You have all the benefits of a gravity system in that you provide access to every single lot around the lake. And that's existing customers, that's potential customers, that's you build a new house, that's new customers. So you have the benefit of growth, and you have the benefit of a perimeter system. You get off of the subaqueous system, and this approach is entirely feasible. You could start at the dam and work your way around, and do it as funding and as allowed. So it's entirely feasible.
How many of these kind of low head lift stations do you think you would?
So that
It's a bunch.
it's
is
a bunch.
of them.
It's a
I mean,
bunch.
it could conceivably be, and I just don't know what the distance is. But,
It's 28 miles of
it
shoreline.
It could conceivably be 65, 7,500 of these. But there could be 65 to 100. It depends. You have to work out
You have to work out.
the hydraulics of it and the perimeter that we've got to get around and what we've got to start it on with that. But
So one of the issues that we're fighting in the backshore is that The initial thought is that the lake could be drawn down 16 feet. That was commonly understood, commonly accepted, until the lake was brought down to its lowest level and it was measured at 12. So we don't have as much backshore to work with. If we wait until a reservoir drain went in, we theoretically have as much backshore as we want to have. However, do we necessarily want to wait until the dam renovation is complete in order to have that backshore? So this and the number of these pumps is directly related to the topography and the geography as we design it around. But you are dealing with a large number of these on the, not on the order of, 750 like the low pressure system, more on the order of the previous where you convert each manhole into a pump station. But the benefit with this is that you don't require two pumps. You have SSO protection, and each pump station is considerably smaller because it's only lifting, feet.
Reese, would those be in the shoreline, or would there be liquid around those?
There would be, that's another component. This would have to be in the back shore. So this would be within the lake perimeter. You'd have to have buoys around it.
You could design that so that David Airwood and his crew could take the boat out
Literally, you could pull the boat right up to it.
and,
Have to work off a
right,
barge.
Yeah, you'd have to work, yeah.
How do you get around the requirement for duplex pump station for a backup pump, or does this require a variance? I mean, this is a novel.
This is a novel approach, and what we would argue is that the gravity serves as the backup.
That's the
Yeah,
back.
I mean, yeah.
That's the
I mean,
backup.
I don't have an issue with that, but you'd have to get a variance.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then there's a number of different things that you want to do that, on this project that are gonna be here.
Right.
So as
Yeah.
Bree said, this is not the fast track.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you guys did the right thing by, run that by Kristen before you.
Yeah, this is not a fast track. Quite frankly, none of this is fast track.
I mean, I will say when I did this, I did it in Florida, we had a neighborhood that was very, very, slight slopes, and get from point A to point B, and so we did this, and I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever done before in my life. But it made sense based on the problem they faced, and it's interesting that it's a similar problem here in a completely different circumstance.
How did the permitting go with that?
We didn't have a problem with it, because the back, well, it's Florida, but the backup is there. I mean, the redundancy is in the gravity, and it's not ideal, and so, but the only thing you have really in each of those wet wells is the single pump and a high water run flow.
Was it like did it have a grinder function, or was it just?
I think we did have cutters
Okay.
in there.
Okay. Interesting.
so by the way, the table that I handed out here to you all listing the alternatives, I made a mistake. You need, on number 5, to put an X there. They did not, Labella did not recommend number 5.
One thing, two things, one I don't like about that and the one that I do.
Okay. Let's start with what you don't
I
like.
don't like the 65 pump station,
I know.
but it is a whole lot better than 1,000 pump stations. But one plus that I can see with that, just sitting here running it through my head now is, we have a combination out there on that lake now. A lot of homes have pump stations now, to where they pressurize their system to theirs. And a lot of people come to theirs by gravity. And with a system like that, that could accommodate either or, as they are now. So if you go in and you decide to go with HDPE, low pressure around the lake, then essentially everybody's still gonna have to have a pump station to overcome the pressure to be able to get in.
In the low pressure system around the lake, you would have to provide gravity laterals from each pump station that they can tie into. This overcomes that because it provides access to the property line for each property. You could still stub up every other property line for them to tie into. As I rode around the lake with David and I looked at the laterals, my first thought is, we gotta get the homeowners out of the lake. We gotta get the local plumbers and the homeowners out of the lake. Let them work above the water line
Yes.
and let the town deal with below the water line. So personally, I know Brian likes this. Personally, I like this one as well. And this one's fairly high on my list at this point to pursue.
So how far back from the actual shoreline to where those manholes would be?
We would try to work within the available backshore area. So as you drop
So
the
at
lake
least
12 feet.
12 feet back or?
In that range, it would, you know, each of these, you have existing structures that are in the way. You have rock rock outcrops that are in the way. So literally, there isn't a single foot of any of these systems that will not have to be designed. Like, there's nothing we can say, oh, just put it 10 feet off the shore. All of this will have to be designed every single step of the way.
And then how high would the actual manholes be above the water?
I would imagine we'd put the tops 2 foot above the
Yeah.
water. I mean, that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
Then your town would have to, or you would have to run electrical lines out to each of those.
Correct. Correct. You have to have, with any pump station option, you have to have an electrical system.
And so how deep would you go before you returned it up?
We would try, we would want to stay to what is accessible at the lowest lake level. So the benefit of a system like this is you have access all the time. If they want to see what these HDPE lines are doing, they pop the manhole, they send the camera down, they run it along. If they determine there's a problem in the line, then you have to drop the lake down, then you have to access it. But we would want the city to be able to access this without having to do any kind of cofferdam or aquadam or structure like that. So we would try to keep it as shallow as we could. And it would also stay out of rock, to try to keep it as shallow as we can.
David, do you have any facilities or like parts of the line where you get a lot of blockages from, like, okay, like a typical example is like a nursing home or a school where they're flushing, or a prison where they flush bed sheets, you know, bunk heads.
That's the unique thing about this system. It's the only place I've ever seen that doesn't have blockages and SSOs in that system itself, right in the lake.
Cause no, under, like in a normal city where we have all that kinds of stuff, this would concern me, but
Yep.
one of the benefits I think you have here, and that's what I wanted to confirm, is you don't really see that,
Yep.
that type
That's
of large,
exactly right.
solid
Yeah.
blockage, yeah.
Yeah, because I dealt with that a lot, like when I was in Spindale,
Right,
coming
yeah.
from the prison and stuff like that, we had a nightmare.
There's always type of like 15% grade.
But is this, that's a good point, is this just a regular manhole, or is this kind of a specialty manhole with something built in for easy cleaning or whatever?
We look at this as a specialty manhole. So we had one of our partners delivered an alternate material here that's in the workshop, or an HDPE manhole. We'd certainly be open to something outside of your traditional concrete.
This is where, too, we get back to the conversation, what percentage of the overall cost, there might be some pumps in this one, for example. Most of it's manhole and pipe.
Most of this is manhole and pipe. You do have, because the pumps are small, you're not gonna have your substantial pump cost. So, yeah, when you compare the pump cost to the line cost to the manhole cost, it is a smaller portion of the cost.
Let me caveat.
Go ahead.
One thing, before anybody gets the opinion that we have a preconceived notion on
No, we
this,
don't.
Bree says, I like this. I nervously think this can be engineered to work very, very well. I don't have a preconceived notion that this is what we need to do by any stretch.
Yeah, sure.
It's one of the options, and probably one that warrants a lot of difficulty.
So I like several of the options. I don't like several of the options, but, you know, I'm not coming in with a preconceived
Could
notion.
you run, would you, go ahead.
One of our.
Yeah, so, as well as being accessible, Reese, I think one of the questions I would have is, as you phased in, you got to effluent somewhere, right?
Mhm.
So you may be able to, if you did it in phases, effluent into the existing laterals until you get the complete system online. How would you build one cove of that, and not, you have to send it somewhere, so you would actually actually have kind of a hybrid system as you phase this thing in? Is that what you imagine?
It would depend on where you start. So if you start away from the dam, then yes. If you start at the dam, then you would put in the infrastructure to get to the wastewater plant in the first phase.
And then add on to that?
And then add on to that as you
I
go.
got you, I got you, thank you.
So if you could imagine, you're starting at the dam and you're moving on each side of the lake, going toward the operations center, going toward the beach.
Gotcha.
And when you get to the beach, you're completely done.
Yep.
How would you run the electrical? Or like to get down into-
So it's an excellent question, and I would say that it would have to be, you would want some type of generation capacity. These would be small generators, obviously, and you would have to run it in HDPE conduit that would parallel the gravity.
Okay, just like attached to the pipe, basically.
Yeah.
That was
mean,
what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the reality of the situation is we can't get around it by gravity, so we need the ability to lift. This approach addresses that by trying to lift it in small stages and dealing with lower voltages, lower amperages, lower head requirements than a traditional lift station with a pump that's pumping. There's 28 miles of shoreline. If we divide that in half, then conceivably a pump station at one end's got to pump 14 miles. So you're dealing with some head issues, some manifold, some design issues, and these try to simplify that. And so, as Kristen mentioned, this would be designed for it being completely done. So the pumps and the line at the dam would be larger than the pumps and the line at the beach, and it would just be built that way in phases.
But because of the low head of this, one of the nice things about it, even when you get down to the dam, you're accommodating full flow from everything upstream. These pumps could still be only like 5 horsepower. I mean, they're lifting 10 feet a day. They're still relatively small from an electrical standpoint.
You're moving on a lot of flow, you know,
Mhm.
How would this system react to when you have flow coming from outside entities to where you get spikes in rainstorms?
It'd have to be designed accordingly. And so one approach is to incorporate the village and Rumbling Bald into the system. Another approach would be to put in a pump station and pump around. And so that's part of the evaluation of how to handle those outside users.
Frankly, I don't think you would want, if you're just running around the lake with that kind of a closed system, you wouldn't have I-9 that.
No.
Pretty much wouldn't have I-9 that.
And that's one of the
If you-
benefits of using
if you add-
HDPE is it's fused, so you don't have joints.
Yeah, but if you add chimney rock in that, you've changed that.
You've changed the
design.
whole
You've
ballgame.
changed the whole design, because you just increased it by 3.
Well, and that's what I was thinking about. I mean, I see what happens when we have these storms. And the perimeter of the lake, that works good in my head.
Yeah.
But when you add these outside entities in that we're not controlling, it could be a big
So
difference.
potentially you would put a pump station at the bottom of Chimney Rock and it would be dedicated to send it around?
So that's one approach.
Or you would have to get them to really button up their I and meter it or something?
In practice, buttoning up I&I is easier said than done. And so, one approach is to put a pump station in and actually run the force main in the backshore area. So that the force main parallels the gravity line, and you eliminate some of the right-of-way issues that way, some constructability issues that way. Again, that's more of a design question as we get into metering the flows from Rumbling Bald and metering the flows from the village, looking at what those peaks are, looking at what potential growth is, and looking at what the sizing requirements would be for the perimeter system. So that's a design question. But that is, we mentioned this was interwoven, and that's an example of, another stream.
Reese, another issue as I think through it, so we're also struggling with the penetration of the dam.
Mhm.
Which now we'll figure that out. It seems to me that this option, as we discuss these different ones, that this option divorces the necessity for a dam penetration, right? You could really realistically pump over the dam if you needed to.
You could pump over the dam, or you could go through the dam. You would have the option to do both.
Okay.
Well, good, because if if we have your interest in something that's novel, let's talk about the next approach. Now that we got the hook set, let's talk about a SAM. So this is a subaqueous manhole. It is just what it sounds. It's a manhole installed underwater. So this is not entirely novel. This is done in Pittsburgh. This is done in Lake St. Louis. It is the contractor team that performed this work is out of Washington State and Pennsylvania, both of which have agreed to fly here after February 6th and meet with you on their own dime to discuss this option. So they're very interested in Lake Lure. I've gotten a lot of information about this approach from them. In Lake St. Louis was a community where, familiar story, they built the collection system, they built the dam, and then they flooded the collection system. They were told that they needed to spend, this is a population, I think, of 16,000. They were told they needed to spend $90 million on a low pressure system. And the homeowners said, no, okay? So if 16,000 people said no to $90 million, you can imagine the reservation that 1,200 people would have to $60 million if you just run those numbers. And so an approach was, and some technology was actually developed for this project that we would benefit from. So namely how this works, you have a subaqueous manhole. These cost about $500,000 a piece. You would send divers down that would actually construct a double layer. The outer layer is concrete and the inner layer is HDPE. So the first thing they have to do is locate the line. Then they use like a hydraulic dredging to expose the line and expose the bedrock underneath the line. They drill anchors into the bedrock. They do underwater concrete to pour a base that this manhole is then assembled around the pipe on. It's then sealed and vacuum tested to ensure that it's watertight. At this point, a 6-foot diameter aluminum sleeve is positioned onto the pipe and built all the way up above the surface of the lake. The water is pumped out, the manhole is opened, the pipe is cut into, and then you have access for cleaning, slip lining, closed circuit television, etc. When you're done, you flood the sleeve, you seal the manhole, flood the sleeve, remove the sleeve, and the aluminum sleeve would be part of the project that would be left with the town. It's important to note because divers are required to access these, but because the town would own the sleeve, you could use local divers to assemble it for access. The plan for Lake St. Louis is to access the line every 10 years and do closed circuit television of the entire line every 10 years. The benefit, I think, is the lake level does not need to be dropped. So you're not necessarily dealing with some of the time constraints. You're reusing your existing infrastructure, so you don't have the cost of new pipe installation. The drawback would be how to deal with new customers. You already have issues with the lateral, so we would still need to replace the perimeter manholes. We would still need to put in gravity laterals for the customers to tie into, and you would potentially need to add additional manholes. And at $500,000 a pop, it's very expensive to add to this system. So this is a very novel approach. This has been employed successfully in multiple locations. And it is one we need to seriously consider. This is the first of our bottomland approaches. And like I say, it has been successfully done. It has many, many benefits, one of which is cost. One of which is scheduling, because this can be done regardless of lake level. And the maximum distance of the manholes is about 3,000 feet, which was the limits of the ability to do slip lining. This is not necessarily something for traditional cast-in-place piping, but certainly a slip lining or a cast-in-place with UV, might work here. But this is highly specialized construction, and there are only a handful of people in the country that can do this. So the construction of it is very specialized, but nonetheless, it's something we would recommend pursuing further. You have no pump stations, and one of the it doesn't require right-of-way acquisition. Some of the liabilities are it relies on the existing grade of the SASS. So we don't know how it was installed. Don Byers has seen video of parts of it, and it appears to do this.
So is that pipe, the existing pipe, just going to remain with this method?
This method would install the manholes and then slip line the entire main.
And slip line?
See, I would be
Are you gonna be
full
able?
and form, right, Reese? You'd be putting the bag down from a barge.
But are you gonna be able to slip line if the pipe does?
That's a good question.
And that is part of the reason that the specialty contractors that do this want to see the video and want to meet with the town and want to put their eyes on this and see if that solution works.
And the other thing about those dips, if it's shown, if we can show through real analysis that we all agree that there is treatment going in and the treatment's causing those sags, then that's gonna kind of put a nix on this idea, because like that system right there, you're gonna get 220.
But
More likely you're gonna get 220 BOD down to 200.
if you only have 20% of the line TV right now, and that's 80% that you don't have
Mm-hmm.
video.
I guess in addition to the, slip lining the bends, like, can you slip line these really deep remote sections that are like? in
So
middle of
the
lake?
first access point would be the manhole behind the dam. So you would come under the dam. There is some concern with junction boxes. There is some concern with bends. One of the first steps that would be involved in this, there are some devices that use a triaxial gyro that you would act like an inertial guidance system in a military aircraft, that you would actually have to run up the line to give you X, Y, and Z coordinates. So we'd have to know where this line is. And then you would place your manhole. So if there was a bend or a junction box, that would become potentially where a manhole would have to be placed to get that access. I mean, we can tell looking at it, there are bends, like we know they're there. And so once you determine exactly where the line is, exactly where those bends are, then you design the manhole locations.
But this may force you to put manholes right in the smack dab in the middle of the lake,
You're absolutely correct.
but they're removable.
But they're removable. So they're not going to influence lake traffic, because the deepest manhole in Lake St. Louis is 55 feet. At 90 feet, the divers would need their own decompression chamber, and they have 30 minutes on the bottom. So we would try to go as far up from behind the dam, if you will, as we can.
So these manholes are really, because I wasn't understanding completely initially. These manholes are like, they only exist
They're access points.
every 10 years when you
Yes.
specially get in
Yes.
there and use them.
Yes.
They're like way down below.
You need a diver to go down and assemble this sleeve.
Is there an O&M light
Um,
to the back?
Tim, if you will look at the very last page. All right, you see a picture of, that's the Those are the sleeves. And
Is there a
at,
gasket at the bottom of that?
yes,
So, obviously, the gasket's a consumable item, but it's pretty easy to replace.
Mhm.
And the water tightness is related to that, pretty much.
to that. So you would assemble those aluminum sleeves on the bottom, come up, pump the water out, and then you have access.
So it is like a dry pit when you're.
It's a dry pit when you're accessing
Every 10
it.
years when you're working on it.
Yes.
But the rest of the time,
It's underwater.
it's just an access port
Yeah.
way down, okay, got it.
It's a submerged access port.
Right,
With that type of repair, if you went in and slip lined it, by slip lines, you're essentially taking the lake water out.
Correct.
So our flow numbers are drastically gonna drop from what they are now.
Correct.
And if it's true that that line is not on grade, what is the potential of that line stopping up at that?
I think that's an excellent point. That's one of the liabilities. And when you had an X, Y, and Z coordinate, if you realize that you have sags or that a portion of this was installed bucking grade, then you reach kind of a no-go.
Yeah.
And that's a risk with undergoing the investigation, is you may identify something
It's a sunk cost.
that's a no-go.
If you had, this is getting way out there, if you had a lot more real estate where the wastewater plant is and you could build a big EQ basin, you could flush into the EQ basin periodically, but you didn't have room for that.
That is correct. So one of the concepts with relocating the wastewater plant to a new location is converting the existing plant into an EQ basin and using that as an area to shave off those peaks, or if we had a flushing a system. If you knew in the collection system you were going to flush, then the wastewater plant could accommodate that flush by employing the EQ basin. So when we say that everything's interwoven, we literally mean everything is interwoven. But yeah, Tim, absolutely, like no, there is no options right now off the table, and we strive to use as much of the existing infrastructure as we can, even if it's repurposed.
Reese, little humor.
Yes,
This
sir.
required by wetsuits for all our maintenance people.
No, it wouldn't.
Okay, go ahead.
As has been explained to me, any local licensed commercial diver would be able to install these sleeves. And then they would pump it out, then they would turn it over to the maintenance staff, who would have to go down the chute though. So that is, somebody has to go down there.
He didn't hear that.
Yeah, he didn't hear that. So, I mean, you are dealing, we are dealing with confined entry spaces. You're talking about working from a barge. You're talking about having harnesses and providing air. So all of the necessary safety protocols would have to be in play here, without question.
I guess your manufacturer rep that comes down will take into consideration, because it's the lake that this was predicated on is not as deep as.
It's 55 feet. Yeah.
Right, so you've got a tube sticking, the pencil sticking 100 feet up.
Correct.
Wave action and all of those issues, they'll look into that and see if it's doable.
Correct. And it's not a manufacturer. It's actually the Lake St. Louis was design build. This was the contractor of the design build team. It's two members of the contractor, one that provided the location and slip lining, and one that actually is a marine specialty contractor out of Pennsylvania that constructed the underwater manholes.
How deep is Lake Worth?
It's 95 feet at the deepest, or 100 feet at the deepest.
104 feet at the dam.
104 feet at the dam. Now, again, we would try to eliminate that by using the manhole behind the dam and slip lining as far as we can. One of the robotic instruments that was developed to locate and TV the line in both. So one of the contractors that wants to come down was the contractor that located and TV'd the line at both Lake Oswego and Lake St. Louis. So he has experience with both projects. He developed a robotic tether that uses fiber and not copper. And he can run his robot 7,000 feet up the line from the dam to do closed circuit televisioning and things like that. So, again, I mean, we're dealing with equipment that was developed especially for subaqueous systems that we would be benefiting from the lessons that they learned. He shared with me he had about $200,000 out of his own pocket to develop this for those projects.
Bruce, did they slip line in either of those two projects?
They slip lined Lake St. Louis. Lake Oswego is the floating tethered system that we're going to talk about next. That's if you look at the second to last page, that is Lake Oswego. And so you actually, the lines are buoyant, they have floats, and they're actually tethered to the bottom. So that's the next approach. They call it the tethered buoyant HDPE system. This is also not a solution we would recommend. And part of the problem with this is cost. The low pressure, this is a population, I think 37,000. The estimated cost of the low pressure system was around $125 million, and this came in at 90. So, this is a very expensive alternative. It does provide for an obstruction that's within the water volume. So if it's hit by a dredger or hit by an anchor or something like that, it is actually in, it's above the sea floor, essentially.
And just like any other boat, if you fill it with water, it sinks.
Yes,
So if it got hit, damaged,
it would.
from a leak.
It would potentially sink. The other problem with this is access. You're going back to, you're just putting in a system exactly like the one you have now, that once it goes in, you can't access it. And that's what I think is a major problem with this system, is you guys. So Lake Oswego, this was more of a transmission main and not the lateral tying. So it's not identical to what we're doing here, but again, you don't have access. So those are some of the reasons that we would not recommend this alternative. The next option also in the bottom land and the lake bottom is a submerged HDPE system. And this would be a system where you would build a floating HDPE network in the lake, and then you would sink that system and secure it to the lake bottom. This has this has the benefits of, right, the closest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So it's a lot easier to go right down the middle of the lake than it is to go around the sides. This could be upsized. This could be size according. You can put in laterals. You can put in manholes as you need to provide additional access to the system. The drawback is, while this system would not require the lake to be lowered per se, the construction area would be the entire lake. So you're talking about taking the entire lake out of service if you try to put this in one big swoop, or at least the area that you're building this floating network in, the lake would be off limits. So that's a social cost. Another problem is access. Again, once you sink the system, you're back where you were before. You have a better material in HDPE, arguably, but you have no future access to the system. And if a system gets damaged, you have no means to access it to fix it. So,
But now this system, still you're going from manhole to manhole.
you're still going from, so you would have the main line here. So if this is your lake, right, and you have a manhole here and a manhole here, you would build this network and then sink it. So your manhole would run down into the lake bottom. If that makes sense. And again, the reason we don't recommend doing, or at this point, we don't want to look at this further, primarily is we don't want to put a system in that has some of the same liabilities as the system is now, which is the fact that you have no future access to the system.
So the submerged HDPE system, you're not recommending it? It says in here,
I'm sorry, you're right.
you are recommending.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the tethered system. We do recommend looking at it with the caveat that it has significant limitations.
I mean, I guess, and just the counterpoint is there's and I'm not an expert on pipe, but there's a huge difference between fusion welded HDPE as a material as far as resiliency and, you know, what's in there now.
Yes.
In a number of ways.
In a number of ways.
Resistance, you know, fracture resistance.
No joints.
No joints.
No joints. For this system, HDPE would be, I would never entertain putting back in cast iron. Or really even ductile iron for that matter. I mean, we would want to go back with, HDPE is one of those things that engineers love and landfills hate, because it never goes away. And that's what we want in this system is long life. So we want to put in a material that is going to be very resistant to corrosion, very resistant to hydrogen sulfide, and very resistant to impact.
Can this system easily be phased? It almost looks like you
No.
have to put it.
I think this system would have to be put in at the same time. I don't know. I've tried to think about how the system could be phased, and I don't know how it could.
And just for anybody that's not familiar with pipe materials, like HDPE is not like, PVC plastic. It is.
Correct.
It is a lot more, just a lot
So
more.
it's probably about
resilient.
that thick.
Yeah, I mean, you can beat on it with a sledgehammer.
Probably 2 inches thick.
And the pipe used at Lake Oswego was intentionally very thick, thick wall pipe. And that's what we would put here. I mean, we're not gonna put a thin walled pipe in. We're gonna do something that has the longevity, and the resistance to external forces, that we need.
Yeah, being that far down, you would need it.
You would need it, absolutely.
Resistant to the pressure on the outside.
But this method might price itself out of 12.5 million.
I honestly, I think to do it in one swoop, all of these will.
Yeah, all of them are more than that.
But if this has to be done.
Yes,
phased,
correct. It
that's-
has been. The reason I have a to be determined is that,
I understand.
we haven't been able to dig into this approach enough to put a price on it, and because of its limitations, I shifted my focus to others. So it's not, I maybe spoke preemptively, and now you know how I feel about it. It's not one of my favorites, but it's not off the table.
Well, and the HDPE comment applies to wherever that pipe material is
Correct.
mentioned. For those of you not familiar with it, it's a whole different animal from the PVC that's out there.
And that's an argument for an HDPE manhole.
Yeah, and I think, that warrants a little discussion. And
Yeah.
I would love to see this all be HDPE.
I would too.
Now, every time I've ever put HDPE manhole in a job, it's been ridiculously expensive.
Correct.
But that's because I'm typically buying one.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go to that market and say we need 65 of them,
Or 100.
or 100 of them, then I think what we're looking at now is a per unit cost that's probably closer to a regular manhole. Maybe not quite there, but probably way closer.
And the benefit, if you use an HDPE manhole and HDPE pipe, you can fuse the two together. And now your pipe is directly fused to your manhole. So you're trying to get away from mechanical joints.
Reese, one thing with HDPE, could you theoretically, it floats, right? So
Yes.
It's positively buoyant, so you're really anchoring it to the bottom, right?
So if you Google concrete mats,
Yeah.
so you would, if you had this on the bottom, you would want to secure it with concrete or with concrete mats or something that would provide some additional negative buoyancy and protection. So yeah, absolutely, you have to secure this to the bottom.
But you haven't heard of any system that would be designed, and I'm just kind of thinking out of the box here, which you would anchor it down, but if there were a problem, unlikely, but if there were a problem, you could go down and release the anchors and it would float back to the surface.
That's a novel concept. So a lot of where I've seen this is in in raw water intakes, like in a desalination plant where you're running the pipe out into the ocean and you sink it down to the bottom, and there you really don't care if it gets holes in it.
Right.
I've never seen the concept, the ability to,
I mean, if you sink it,
yeah.
you
Well,
theoretically could raise
so,
it.
and I love it that the submariners talking about raising and sinking things.
By the way, submarines solve all our problems.
With a long
I love it. I love it. So, nuclear. So, my initial, I like the approach. I think it's novel, and I think it's out of the box thinking that we need. Here's my initial problem with that approach. If I look at this in profile, and I have a line down here, and I come up to a manhole, right? This is the hypotenuse of this. So this distance between here and here is gonna be less than the distance between here and here. And so if we float this system, you're gonna be pushing the manholes away.
Yeah.
And so you'd actually have to disconnect all the manholes in order to make it work. So I think it's a novel concept. I like it. I like that kind of thinking. But that would be my hesitation
Yep.
with that approach.
Bottom line is, I'm glad I'm not going out on a submarine with you.
Well, and I've been involved with one of these where, as Bruce said, we're doing a desalination plant in Trinidad. And so that's how we put the intake in. The intake was a couple thousand feet offshore. We ran 30-inch HDPE out, floated it, and then, in that case, it's easy to sink. We fill it with water anyway. So we just filled it with water and sank right where we had it sitting. The other issue there is there's nothing connected to that. It's a straight line with nothing teed into it. And pipe connections don't like to be jerked around and moved.
No, they don't.
And having a system out there that has a whole bunch of T's in it, and we start moving it all wholesale at once, has a lot of potential to damage that.
They don't have like spandex woven into the
Yeah.
HEC is way more forgiving. in that
It's
way
forgiving, but is it that
because of
forgiving?
material. But, you know, it's not springy at joints,
Yeah.
you know, which is almost what you need to make this work.
So one of our design approaches is to look back and say, what have we done that's even remotely similar to this, and can we apply that here? And so that's what you're seeing in these alternates. You're seeing we've done parts and components of every single one of these approaches, and we're trying to use an approach to solve the problem. And then once you get all your approaches down, you come back and say which approach does the best, or which combination of approaches does the best. You may run into a situation where this part of the lake we're using option A, and this part of the lake we're using option B. So you're not being tied to one approach for everything. I think I pointed to Tryon Bay when we were at the restaurant as an example of a situation where you may need a local unique approach to solve Tryon Bay, and you'll likely run into that in other areas. So I think when you get into the final design, you have to be flexible, and you have to understand the tools in your tool bag and their limitations.
Rich, if my memory serves me correct, that involved that island, right off the Cape Fear River in the Atlantic Ocean, they don't have power plants, any of that out there, so that power, they ran a line over to it. And then later Brunswick County took over the sewer system right there. I think they attached some type of line to that power line to keep it down and keep it floating up. But it's underwater for a while. And,
My guess is that's a force main. My guess would be that was a force main.
That would be lower than Brunswick County. Well, so it had to be some kind of force on it to get it over.
To go there.
It's tied to an electric line.
So yeah, you certainly have sunk and secured lines underwater, but you know, each alternative has to be evaluated in its own merit, and it has to be evaluated as objectively as possible. Of what's, we talked about triple bottom line, which one has the lowest social, economic, and environmental cost. And so it, I think one of the points that Tim brought up is, are you going to do a detailed alternative or alternate analysis? And yes, I mean, you have to. I think at this point, we wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we didn't at least look at these. The second to last one is the drain and replace approach. This approach would do just what it says. You would drain the lake, then you would go in and install a new subaqueous system. You would install the subaqueous manholes that I described in the dry, and then flood them. That would provide your future access. This approach we really only considered this approach doable if the dam renovation required the lake to be drained. And I think that really changes the calculus. If the issue with the penstock tower is such that they can't isolate it, or if the dam engineers come and tell us, guys, we have to drain this lake down, then we go back and we look at this again and say, while the lake is drained for the dam, do we put in a new subaqueous system, but install it with HDPE and install it with future access? I think the social and economic cost of draining the lake for a substantial period of time are extraordinarily high. And it would take something on the level of, we can't renovate the dam with the water level up to justify it.
What's the minimum spacing on the subaqueous manholes?
The minimum spacing that was used in Lake St. Louis maximum spacing was 3,000 feet. Minimum spacing is minimum spacing is whatever you need to be.
And the 3,000 was based on the,
Ability to slip line,
okay, not the camera.
not the camera. It was based on the ability to
So
slip line.
then you're only talking, yeah, that's a lot, like, I was thinking 400 or 500 feet like conventional sewer, so you're talking about.
So I had this argument with a local slip liner who would have to put a specialty rig with 18-inch to get 900 feet. And I said, 900 feet isn't good enough. I need thousands of feet. And again, so when you deal with individuals that are used to doing this in North Carolina, those are the things you run into. And when you branch out into Washington State, or you deal with people that have to do things in a larger scale. So the maximum manhole distance used was 3,000 feet because that was the limits of what they could slip line. It was actually the maximum limit of slip lining, I think, was around 3,500. So they cheat it to give themselves a little bit of wiggle room, because you don't want to be that one where you need an extra foot and you can't get it, and you got a foot of the line somewhere that isn't slip line. So you cheat a little bit on your, like I say, we're going to push the limits of technology, but we're not going to exceed it. And so that's where you give a little factor of safety in your distance. But 3,000 feet was what has been employed.
And then separately, the profile of the line would affect the ability to slip line at that distance.
Exactly. Well, and so that is, so looking for video of the main. And that is what I believe we have, and we can show them.
Is it what Don thinks he?
That's what Don thinks he has, is video of the main. And we can show them the ups and downs, and then argue it out of what we think they can do. And I've been told, like I say, I had a 40-minute conversations with a material supplier out of Illinois, who we ran through this, and he had to finally just say, you're pushing my material beyond its limits. I wouldn't recommend using my material in Lake Lure, because I think the conditions there are too extreme. And that's what you have to do. I mean, you have to go to these material suppliers, and you have to lay it out for them, and you have to ask the tough questions, because, again, failure is not an option. And we have to be very, very certain that whatever we recommend is doable. That's the only way we're meeting our fiduciary responsibility to you, is that we're very confident and we vetted these things before we recommend them.
Reese, we may be able to get a little bit of intelligence about the marine if we actually have an opportunity to speak to the divers and some of the rapping.
True. So some of the observations the divers made, one was that the pipe appeared to be in fairly good condition, and two, they could hear water running into it. So that's low-level infiltration. The portions of the main that I'm most concerned with are the ones that are 5, and so the deepest main they uncovered in Lake St. Louis was 16 feet under the bottom. They were able to muck it out all the way down 16 feet. What those lines that are underneath the sediment are doing, those are the ones that I'm concerned with, because those are the ones divers can't see. And what I'm trying to find, and I'm utilizing contacts I have from the U.S. to China, is what type of robotic instrument could we use to access this line and turn bends and go from laterals to mains. And that's still a work in progress. And we are, in some ways, I have been told I can get it into the main, but I don't know if I can get it out. And the expense of this robotic instrument is such that if they aren't sure they can get it out, they're not going to put it in.
Unless you're willing to buy it.
Unless you're willing to buy it from them and just leave it in there. Just cut the tether and leave it. And so, again, we're leaving no stone unturned. But there are some technological limits to what we're trying to do.
Reese, one final question.
Yes, sir.
I get, all your options fantastic. Thank you for the great work.
We got
I'm
one more.
curious- Huh?
We got one more.
Oh, I'm sorry, but well, let me talk about
Yes.
this one because it's related. You talked about slip lining and even the feasibility of slip lining. I'm wondering why we didn't see one which was slip lining and then replacing the manholes in the backwater area.
So that is the last one.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Okay.
Never mind.
So the last one is repair and rehabilitation of the perimeter manholes.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at our recommendation there, we don't recommend this as standalone, but we do recommend it as part of another approach. And so here is the picture that we are currently trying to build, and Ken has been instrumental in providing us some flow data and dam level data. Don has been providing us with the flow charts that you saw, so we've started an analysis to try to quantify what the low-level infiltration is, what the high-level infiltration is, and what inflow and infiltration is. So an initial concept we developed was we need to address both the subaqueous system and the wastewater plant. We know that there's a very high level of lake infiltration in the upper 12 feet. So what if we go and we replace all of the perimeter manholes? We redo the laterals. We replace or slip line the laterals as far down as we can go, or at least TV them to see if they need to be slip line or replaced. And we can get the flow levels from the lake low enough that biological treatment's possible. So we do that first. Then we renovate or repair the wastewater plant and get back to a biological process. And then we go back to the collection system and either repair it or replace it. That is an option that needs to be explored further because it directly addresses the UNOVs. It directly addresses both the wastewater plant and the collection system. So as a standalone approach, that is that's a short-term approach as standalone. In combination with another approach, that's a workable long-term solution.
Could be phased.
It absolutely could be phased. Replacing the manholes around the perimeter of the lake and dealing with those laterals is not a high-cost option. And so that would leave a fair amount of monies to look at your wastewater plant. And then the next phase would be starting to replace the main.
Is it fair to say that that option could evolve, depending on what the data looks like after that phase? You would design it such that you could go and leap to another option like that one if you replace the manholes around the lake. I mean, you really be smart in the design and say, wow, that really worked, or it bought us 15 years, but we're still gonna replace the main trunk with that system. I mean, if we thought through it, it may be, and I think that's what you're thinking about with the long-term approach.
Absolutely. So we would design it with the intent of hoping to reuse it
Right.
with another approach. So if we were doing the gravity lift approach, we would replace the manholes by moving them into the back shore, if that makes sense. And then we would reuse those as part of the gravity lift approach.
Let me just throw out one thing, your title of this option is repair and rehabilitate the perimeter manholes. There's, your discussion is talking about rehabilitating or replacing, and I think the options analysis warrants looking at, can we do a rehab on these manholes? When I say rehab, I guess the manholes went in 27 also, right?
The manholes went in 27, and part of the difficulty is some of these are easily accessible. The one you saw today had, but some of them are integrated into seawalls. Some of them are actually into the foreshore area. And so some of these could be easily just removed and replaced. Some of them would need to be rehabilitated where they are.
So there might be a combination of that, that obviously is driven by condition of the manholes as they are. And one of the reasons you would rehabilitate a manhole is if the structure itself brings you benefit that a liner that you might put inside that structure wouldn't give you. The liner's way cheaper than a brand new manhole. So I think the question is going to become, for a particular manhole to be useful in a rehabilitated sense, does it fit in with the system that we ultimately want to get to? And so if it's a system like the gravity slash pump stations one, gravity lift stations one, then that question probably has a lot to do with how deep is it? Is it at the right depth that we need it to? Because that's something we can't easily do with an old manhole, make it deeper. But there may, my guess is there'll probably be some combination. There'll be somewhere we'll look at them and say, gosh, out of 65, there's 20 of them that are kind of in the right spot. We can make them work where they are. We just need to put some kind of liner in them, and that excludes the water, but the structure will hold up, and the structure isn't hold up against leaks, but it structurally will protect the liner. So.
In this method, what also, all the laterals from Seine would be replaced with brand new HDPE.
I think we have to. I think as we're, the liners, the laterals.
The laterals, all the
Yeah.
laterals get replaced.
Well,
So-
down to where you can go.
Down to
Yeah.
where you can get to. Which is
What, no, Kurt, what he's talking about are the private laterals.
what
You're talking about the private laterals or the public laterals?
public lateral.
Okay, so the public laterals would need, in the very least, be closed-circuit televisioned and cleaned, and if their condition warranted any kind of repair or replacement, that done.
Could use a slip.
You could. So you could. Yeah, it's commonly believed that you have to have a point A and point B to slip line. I have been told now by 2 contractors that is not true. They can actually dead in the slip lining. That I would have to be convinced of, but I have been told that it can be done.
Do all the laterals come into a manhole? None of them, like, this, there are no laterals that are tapped onto the top.
There's one that has been replaced with a manifold, but all of the private laterals tie into manholes, and then all the manholes tie into the main via laterals. There's one that I'm aware of where the manhole was replaced with a manifold, but that's the only one I'm aware of.
We have an alternative that does a combination of manholes and manifolds. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, and so that is something that we've thought about, and the question always arises about access.
So you keep enough manholes for access.
Yeah. So, and these manholes are so far apart that would you benefit more from reinstalling a manhole, which you could pop the cover on and look in and go in and run TVs down, or could you envision some kind of manifold with like a T with the elevated blind flange? You pop the flange off and you can look down in the 6 or 8 inch hole, and you could run stuff down the 6 and 8 inch hole, but you can't like get in. And I think from an O&N standpoint, I would prefer a manhole, something you could actually get in. But again, no options are off the table. And if David tells me I don't want a manhole, I want a manifold, we'll absolutely look at that.
I do think, it's something you were touching on, I do think that the laterals that we put in that go up to the property line in any system that has that feature, I would expect those to be HDPE onto the HDPE pipe, not manholes. I would like to see as few holes, one in, one out, manhole as I can possibly get.
Absolutely.
But this right here, this basically just repairs and fixes what you.
Correct. Correct. And it could be expanded. You could be expanded to include a private lateral manifold as part of this. And so, again, nothing's off the table, and we're expecting these to change based on the feedback that we get today.
So a big part of the subaqueous manhole / slip lining unknown is getting data on the alignment of the pipe, both vertically and horizontally, and feedback from the contractor on what they can and can't do. Because that's gonna dictate, it's not just a manhole every 3,000 feet, it's a manhole every 3,000 feet, and we need one every time the angle is more than, 25 degrees or whatever.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think Seth has provided what, I don't know cost-wise, but I think Seth has provided what may be a solution to that question. And that in a meeting that he and I and Shannon had, he brought up, why don't we go for an AIA grant? Asset inventory and assessment. What do we have? Where is it? And what condition is it in? Sounds exactly like the questions we're asking about the main. And so if we pursued an AIA grant and then used the grant money to pay for this type of investigation in the main, of location and condition, et cetera, that would be a way to answer those questions. At the very least, if it's a no-go, we provide an X, Y, and Z coordinate to your dredger. So he knows exactly where it is. And in the event of a pipe failure before this goes into play, we know exactly where it is. So while we don't know where the break is, we know where to go and look for it. I think.
And there's another phase where, if that makes more sense for us to do that ahead of trying to rush to a design, and you're doing this in series, this needs to be done first before we choose something here, which begins to mess with our 2-year time frame and milestones. So, there's.
I would like to run the two simultaneously. So run the alternative analysis, simultaneously with this effort. I think it answers an important question. And if we find a section of the pipe that is an imminent risk of failure, then we can address that as a point replacement or a point repair, just to buy us the time we need with phasing. But I don't know that we would necessarily have the time to wait for the results. In other words, if the SAM approach just comes out on top in terms of cost, then we push this as fast as we can push it. And Seth, you can speak to this. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the deadlines and when it's awarded, but you are talking about, delaying. One, you have to apply for it, then it has to be awarded. Then you have to go out for bids for the contractor, then the work has to be done. Then you have to evaluate the results. So you are talking about pushing the timeline in the future.
Something that kind of goes along with that a little bit, and Landon jump into even a lot more about this than I do, is this, we had mentioned this legal agreement, special consent order, whatever it is, that protects everyone, including us, from the EPA and really third-party lawsuits, which can be a big deal, because it shows like, hey, we've got an agreement, we're committed to doing something, we've signed it. And normally, like, the real vanilla version of that is, we're gonna hire an engineering firm to do an evaluation by this date. They're gonna hire a contractor by this date, now we're gonna get A, B, and C project done. I think this will be a little more complicated because you need some flexibility because of all the moving parts and interrelated things we've mentioned. And we need to do a lot of the heavy lifting to get this drafted on our end, but I just wanna there's a lot of smart people in here, I just wanna get it out of everybody's head. That we need to develop this thing that's like robust enough to protect us from lawsuits and inquiries, and also if there's political changes, and at the same time be flexible enough to, and we can amend them, but sometimes if it means it goes back out to public notice and whatever, better to avoid that. So that's something that's gonna have to be developed.
I mean, yeah, that component is not so different from every other component of this project.
Yeah.
It'll have to be flexible, it'll be innovative, it's gonna be robust,
And let's be honest, it is a short-term solution to the NV problem.
Yeah, and on the last,
But anyway, sorry, so the evaluation, if we're getting survey data and doing engineering evaluation, that's usually like the first thing on the SOC. So that's a great first milestone to have on there. So that would be another benefit of getting that data.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I think we'd like to be able to say that we are doing. The lake was flown, so we had the data in hand. So we'll develop topo basically from that data. I mean, we are doing things moving forward. We'll be right in the design already. We have the engineers. We're taking action, putting the valve, but we are trying to ratchet things forward. It's not like we're in a static situation. It's dynamic and we are moving forward.
I have a question for Landon. There were two alternatives that were recommended for further consideration that are substantially pipe under the lake. And that would be the subaqueous access manholes and the submerged HDPE. Would that be a no-go from the regional standpoint?
I tried to remain expressionless in those parts, and I didn't pull my highlighter out, and highlight would not replace or rehabilitate. That said, I don't have a position on it right now.
Okay. So you're open to leave these on the table to shake them out?
I do want to be open, because
Okay.
it's such a unique situation, and that's why I said initially, like, I'm willing to push it as far as we can regulatorily, if that makes sense, because I know we're dealing with this complex, and it's a lot of money.
Landon, to answer your question, not only are the contractor team that did that willing to meet with us, they are in the process of bidding a job in Pittsburgh that installs several of these in a river. And I don't know the timing of it, but certainly if we felt like this approach was one that we were really considering, then we'd be going to Pittsburgh. I want to go see these in action. Not that I'm a diver, but at least while it's in the dry, have a look-see at it. I've done a 30-foot dive, and it was, this is not that. So, yes, there are, when I read about this, my first impression was, oh, really? And I like it because of its innovation. But I still have some serious questions with the manufacturers and contractors about how this goes in. It's very innovative. To my knowledge, this has not been done in North Carolina. If it has, nobody's mentioned, nobody's told anybody. So.
Let me, okay, so if our project, if our $12.5 million project, phase one, call it, if it utilizes this repair and rehab perimeter manholes and the laterals, if one of the goals of that is to obviously reduce I&I, but if it's to reduce I&I to strengthen BOD enough to where a full biological plant would actually work, and that's kind of a goal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, because let me just, with right now the water level is down. So what kind of strength are you getting coming into the plant right now?
You have that information, Kurt.
He said, what I recall, and this is the whole question, it's like 60.
It's like 60. The problem with that, Ken, is the composite sampler, the influent composite sampler is not operational. So we do not have, and as we get into the wastewater plant alternatives, like we spell this out, we don't have the data that we need to design a wastewater process. And it's just,
That's what I was mentioning at the plant. There's some figuring out some data there and figure out it's an anomaly. We're surprised by that. We got to figure out why. If that's, we just need to know the truth about that.
But it's possible that, I mean, if doing this kind of phase one approach, rehab, is probably good and it probably needs to happen, but it may or may not strengthen the wastewater enough.
correct. Correct, that's the risk.
We may have an auto sampler we could lend you in a pinch. If it,
Well, and so here's the way we're approaching this design question. So Ken provided a lot of information to us, which is DMR data, daily flow data, in addition to lake level data. Going back several years, we're trying to build a model of what the plant flow looks like after the pipe route, as the lake level is fluctuated, while at the same time getting composite influence sampling data so that we can have a clear understanding of what's coming into the pipe. Tim introduced me to a hydrogeologist who is helping us with some of our iron issues and tracking down the source of the iron. Thank you, by the way. And in dealing with some private well issues in the public service announcement, which we don't need to go into here. In addition, Don provided us with flow charts while the lake was down. And so one of the ways of determining that low-level infiltration is to chart the flow from midnight to 5 in the morning or midnight to 6 in the morning over an extended period of time and look at what that flow is. The EPA has certain guidelines for approximating your infiltration based on those flows. So attempting to quantify what our low-level infiltration is, high-level infiltration is, inflow and infiltration is, and then back out of that, okay, if we got rid of our high-level infiltration, what would our wastewater look like? Is that treatable? Do we feel comfortable enough that we're going to engage this project to do this work and get a result that we can then build a biological process around? Those are very big questions that we are beginning to lay the groundwork for getting the information to answer. But that's going to take some time, and it's going to take information, some of which we don't have. So Don is looking at what it would take to bring the influent composite sampler back up to speed and get it running. That would be used to gather influent data on TSS and ammonia and BOD and iron, and he's going to take samples around the collection system, take samples from the lake itself. So the reason the wastewater plan is so short is because we don't have the data necessarily to make a process evaluation.
so we've got a spare composite flow proportional deposit sampler, that if he has trouble getting that up and running,
Okay.
tell him to call me and we can, rather than him mess around for a month. we can-
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really good. Another thing is maybe, maybe there's so much unknown, there's so many unknowns about this that, maybe this $12.5 million project really itself needs to be phased. Kind of a and B.
Mm-hmm.
You do the collection system first, see how that affects the wastewater. I don't know.
What we don't want to happen is we don't want to utilize all of the monies and get a lot of our inflow out, and we still can't treat it, and we're still getting NOVs. That's,
I have a question, another question, Joanne. How long could the SSC be in terms of years reasonably?
It's, could be like 2 years, but we can extend it.
Yeah.
And again, this, I see this as being phased, so
Yeah.
if there is an SSC, there would be another one. something
Yeah,
like that.
I'd say, that, if there's something weird going on down there, that we replace the manholes and the laterals and we still have weak, that's gonna be a problem.
Yeah, understood, and it can be drafted.
Yeah, we implemented one
Okay.
because of contract, it was like an interceptor project they were gonna tie this little old lagoon into, and the contractor ran into a bunch of rock, and project delayed 6 months, so I just said, just have the contractor send me the backup with the delays, and then we just amended it and pushed the dates
Well,
out.
like you say, we're planning on having these as much as you guys wanna do it. This end's gonna wanna have meetings, let you know everything that's going on, give you all the data, so you know what we're asking for.
I mean, you still haven't taken the catastrophic portion off though by doing this, but it
No.
is phased because you're taking care of what you understand and what's proven to be infiltration. So you're going after low hanging fruit with $1, but the sleeping giant remains, if it is a giant.
and part of the AIA approach is trying to answer the sleeping giant question.
Yeah, I don't want to be responsible for that phrasing you were saying.
Yeah. I'm already penciling it in.
Yeah.
So that,
Uh,
you would get survey data and camera data, and then maybe it's got some kind of pipe wall, non-destructive.
No, with that particular piece of equipment, you're getting closed circuit television and XYZ data.
Okay.
To get pipe wall thickness or do any kind of, the problem with access and doing some kind of like magnetic flux that you're referring to is you just don't have the access
Okay.
to do that. So we would really be looking at the XYZ data and looking at the inside of the pipe. The 2007 report noted a section of a lateral that had like a 7-8 foot longitudinal crack in it. And so if we get in there and we see spider cracking, in this, this section of 18-inch main and, it's only like a foot under the soil, then we go, all right, divers, let's go try to put a coupling around this or do some sort of repair because we need the time.
Would it be fair to say that you're using the AIA grant money to cost effectively rehab the laterals, period? And when I say the laterals, the public,
Yeah.
the public laterals.
The public
Manhole
laterals.
down to 12 foot below.
So you would be using the AIA grant money to specifically,
Identify.
what do we have? Identify,
On the
where is it?
laterals, on the laterals.
On the laterals and the main.
And the what?
And the main. So we would go into the dam, get in that manhole and run 7,000 feet up the main,
Okay.
as far as we can
Using
go.
the 7,000-foot specialty camera.
Yes.
Okay.
Look, remember Dave, about this, the AIA grant maximum amount is 150.
Is
No,
150,000.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking, because I don't know how much that 7,000 camera is. I don't know how many ladders you're gonna be able to get.
And again, so that's a specialty contractor out of Washington. And I've had.
Heard of a 7,000-foot camera, by the way. That's
I-
the first time.
I have
I'm glad
not
they
either.
make 'em, but-
Yes, so this was, my understanding, this system was developed specifically for Lake St. Louis.
Yeah. Well, it's worth to get what you can get.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
you get what you
It's
can get.
kind of like a bird in the cage, I mean, the canary in the gold mine. The mine is, if we could only do a small portion, at least gives us an indicator how bad they are.
150,000 is nothing to sneeze at, but it's only 150,000.
Yeah, right. And you look at another 150.
No, I mean, you're absolutely correct, and I haven't seen pictures of the system. I understand it's a spring-loaded track, so it actually contacts the top, bottom, and sides of the pipe, and as it goes down, and it can turn bends, but not a 90. So the full disclosure, the guy that I talked to is a retired lieutenant commander from the Navy, and he's a bit of a cowboy.
Oh, your brother. I'd say just having a very well done, very good presentation. There are a lot of good alternatives. It's just something, this gut reaction from this, what seems to be rising in my mind, like cream in the bottle, is that the, I like this one. And the 11 can be repurposed to this. And with the AIA, you can initially tack the laterals to see what shape they're in, get a feel, get started, take a look at the stuff. From that, it's gonna give you more information. And we'll have more wisdom about how to proceed forward. But I think, to further point out, Kurt, if you look at some of the previous surveys, you'll see a disparity in the number of manholes. Some say 50, some say 54. The final is actually 65, and that's because the town has already had them GPS. So now we know where they all are. Some of the previous reports didn't, so there were manholes they missed. In 2007, they used those perimeter manholes as access points to closed-circuit television to laterals. So if we go back in 2020 and do it, we now have a before and after, and we can evaluate the degradation over that time frame. And that can help us project the life of those by having 2 points.
Well, hopefully DEQ goes away understanding how we have restructured on the inside. With Kurt here, you saw the role that he's played in the process and he's been playing. With Labella here versus what we were dealing with before, I think you see progress there. You're hearing us say that we are spending money, we're trying to move forward, we're already, as we said, we have the backshore flown, the natives in the can, topo is being developed, that will feed into design. So we are making forward steps. I think we just want to continue to reassure you guys we are. And whatever instrument we need to put in place to lock us in for as long as we can on them, you know, unless you're different from our board, I think we're, you know, we want to do that. This thing has to survive our election cycles.
I have another question for Landon. Should we do the SOC now?
I still think it's a little early, but.
We've got NOVs coming.
Yeah, but I don't totally understand the first stage yet.
Okay.
I mean, if we back it
Fair.
up, it's not gonna be.
Fair enough. And I think the board has shared the fact that they're willing, that they want to put the best foot forward to DEQ. They're willing to take a look at the fines that you've got right now. Have a totally open mind to that. So
Yeah, and Shannon has told me that, and
it's an olive leaf being extended out.
and we appreciate that. Yeah. And we feel that, we want you guys to know that. We feel the change, and I think you guys are beginning to mirror what it is that we're trying to do back to us, and we feel the change in the partnership. And that's exactly what we need. It's a special project. It's gonna require special communication and a closeness with DEQ that we just have never had before, but it's necessary.
So I guess
with you guys and the folks at DSO over the dam, I mean, it's a new day for us.
I think that, what I'm seeing is that, Labella and the regional office need to work closely together about the timing of the SOC as you directed. As you get information, you give it to Landon, you get some kind of phasing metered out here. There's enough immediately for 2 years worth of work. and they've already flown, there are some steps they've done that could be actually put in the SOC to show EPA. The things that they've done are in the SOC, and you can check them off. They're making, there's quite an investment going on.
And I hope I'm not talking out of turn here, I think we would have enough for the first phase of, I was just gonna say, the first phase of our SOC part one. If, once you know all the things you've mentioned that you've done, plus how you're gonna get the survey data of the line, plus maybe like the design decision and preliminary design, that would be like 3 really good, I'm just talking out loud. 3 really good milestones, would probably take a couple years to get all the way there. And that lets us still have total flexibility, because we're just gathering data, you're still able to make whatever decision you want. Then when we get to that point, we say, okay, part 2 is gonna be however it's bid, or, you know, design build or design bid build, and then milestones with construction and actually completing things. And then maybe there's a part 3, I don't know, but that's, I think, just keep us in the loop as you decide how to go forward and,
Yeah, and
how the
since
fund
Labella is
works out.
keeping you're the repository for the scheduling, this is a critical part of the scheduling.
Yes.
So they need to know what's in your mind to put it on the schedule, so they can keep that critical path method in front of the board.
I like making the part 1 SOC just have those components, because it doesn't tie any decisions with regard to like construction or like which design you're doing. Which I think
we're close.
Yeah.
Well, and so you're aware, one of the very first questions we're trying to answer is, can we get to a biological plant with minimal effort in the collection system? But we're not going to just ad hoc make that call. Like, we're gonna have to be able to justify that call. And I've presented stuff to Ken before, and he looked at it and said, well, have you thought about this? Well, have you thought about that? Like, that's what we need. We need to have that adversarial approach to the data, because we want to be certain before we say, let's go replace all the perimeter manholes, that the end product we're going to get is what we expect.
And recognizing that, it's hard for me to say this, compliance with the NVDS permit is
Yes.
a huge goal, but as an agency, we recognize the interconnectedness of the collection system, and from my standpoint, I kind of want the whole approach to be considered all together, even though
Correct.
compliance-wise, yeah, it's important. So you got these other things that we've all talked about and know about. So I don't want to short-circuit any potential other fixes or plans by just focusing on the compliance.
Very good.
Because I think we maybe made that mistake in the past.
Well, I mean, that's what's
Yeah.
driving it. And that's where
Yeah.
our stronger regulations are versus collection systems. But you still have a collection system entity, and you still got infiltration, and you still got the catastrophic variables. So anyway, I wanted to be a driver, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's not.
So what we're juggling is the funding requirements. We want to put together a project that will get the 30-year money, while at the same time putting together, so we're trying to make DWI happy and DWR happy and collections happy. And yes,
So, yeah, I have a harebrained idea. Can I?
nothing's off the table.
So I could see a scenario where with a little bit more money than we currently have, being able to get the collection system problem solved, which then makes the treatment plant problem worse. And here's where harebrained comes in. We can have the treatment plant problem be exactly like it is today, even if we solve the collection problem by just opening the valve and leaving the water. Ding, ding.
Shannon mentioned that to me earlier this morning.
And that, that leaves us in non-compliance.
But it's not as bad.
But it has taken care of the root problem and then gets us prepped to get the money in the door to solve
Now, you can tell,
to solve the other problem.
now, you can tell that, yeah, you can tell that
Explain this problem
All right, so,
So we have said, if we solve the collection system problem, we are now
so
sending.
Tim, here's what we're
This has been
saying.
discussed, yeah.
Here's what we're saying.
Don't say solution.
Here's what we're saying.
Solution and don't do that.
All right, so here's what we're saying.
I think I know what you're saying.
The flow from infiltration
Uh-huh.
plus the flow from wastewater, right, equals the flow at the plant,
Right.
okay? Well, if we reduce this,
Mhm.
all right, so now Fi is less,
Mhm.
okay, then this becomes a problem. So now what we do here is and we set these two equal to each other. So we have the infiltration and our wastewater flow. We have infiltration and deliberate infiltration and wastewater flow. So we deliberately let water into the
You
line.
have to do it
so
enough to
that-
lower the concentration of ammonia.
Yeah, so we deliberately let water into the line so that the flow the plant receives and the characteristics the plant receives does not change.
Ingenious.
Yeah.
And
Clemson got there faster than the city.
I'm telling you what, you know.
It's entirely a stopgap if the money is not yet there to solve the wastewater treatment plant problem. But we can, with the money that we have, completely solve the collection system problem.
That's good.
I think the answer is no.
I wasn't gonna-
Yeah, that's probably
So-
the answer. Could you use this to help you get, figure out, the capability of the plant to, I don't think I'm thinking this through all the way. Is there any way that this could help solve the question of, can the, just, if we sort of max out the dilution, does that give us some kind of additional data about the strength of the of the wastewater? I don't think so.
So
One
what
thing
you
you'd be
could-
doing is flushing out the bellies of
yeah,
the
flushing out.
pipe.
So,
You clean it out.
Tim, what I wanted to do was to get daily, 24-hour composite characteristics and to chart those in a scatter plot with the flow. And then from that, get a statistical representation of that data and say, okay, this is what we think will generally happen. One day we might get a little more, one day we might get a little less, but statistically, this is what will happen. And I think there's enough daily flow variation to do what you're doing without deliberate infiltration. But I really like this idea. I liked it when Shannon mentioned it to me. I failed to mention to Brian that I wanted to prep you guys a little bit before I
I
brought it
think
up.
we've heard it
Yeah.
before somewhere.
Yeah.
Actually, Tim, your idea is, that's standard, wet chemistry measurements on,
Mhm.
that's exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you do, yeah.
Like you have two variables that you max, if you increase one of them enough, the other one essentially goes to zero. And
Correct.
Does that tell you something about the answer? But I don't think that would give it.
This feels like fourth grade
So-
algebra.
Yeah.
It is.
The what's in the bellies question introduces about 1,000 more variables.
It does.
So I think if we did that, we wouldn't be able to extrapolate an answer
Right, okay.
Yeah.
from the additional data point.
Although I would love
because
to,
of what is probably, because we don't know what's coming out of those bellies, and that's a totally different dynamic.
I would love to fill out a DMR where we blow the flow and write on the note, Tim told us we
Science
could.
experiment. It would be the first time somebody's tried.
Well, the reason before we close out, I think we wanted to see if there's any statements that the council wanted to make, or any member of council would like to make.
Well, I think, first of all, we just, once again, thank you all for being here. This is definitely the direction that we need to go in a long time, and the collaboration and gathering together the people we have here today to begin this process and continue to do it in the future. So we appreciate that. We certainly appreciate Bella and their addition and staff as we are on our process. I think, it's not something that's going to be fixed tomorrow. Our job is going to be, as we were talking, is to translate this into how this is palatable to the people living in Lake Lure. And that's going to be a big project, for us, but we feel real confident about that because we are all of the, joint feeling that this is not something that it would be be nice for us to do. This is something that the, existence of Lake Lure depends on. So, you know, with that sort of sober thought, it makes it easier to implement the things that need to be done and to translate that into something that will be accepted by the public when they understand it. So, just, you know, this is the right course for us. And does anybody else have anything they'd like to say?
I think you covered it.
Thank you so much.
Hmm.
Thank you.